I've talked about this before, and I'll continue to mention this every now and then. I call it the Friday afternoon news dump. See, what happens is when a company, an organization, a group, or a government wants to bury a story, they bury it by dropping the story on Friday afternoon. Now, if you want a triple whammy, if you really want the hat trick, right? You bury the story by dropping it Friday afternoon, and you make sure the Friday is a holiday or a holiday weekend, like Good Friday today, and you make sure it's a busy time of the year where people typically they're not clued into what's going on in the news. They're kind of tuned out. They're unplugged, like right now because it's spring break and because we have the Sweet 16 here in Dallas, March Madness time. So there's a lot of reasons to look at that Friday afternoon news dump. You want to dump bad news to bury it. You want to dump it and drop it on a Friday afternoon on Good Friday when people are thinking about the Christian holiday of Easter, at a time when a lot of people are traveling to or from spring break, at a time when those who are not spring breaking are focused on March Madness. It's a Friday afternoon news dump that occurred today. About 5 o'clock, it was released. I caught this about an hour ago. The headline from Reuters is U.S. has agreed to send more bombs and warplanes to Israel, sources say. As the story goes on to say, according to Reuters, the United States in recent days, so this didn't just happen today, but they've dropped the bomb today. They dropped the news today. So the United States in recent days, they don't say how many days. Has it been 24 hours? Has it been 5 days? So in recent days, the U.S. has authorized a transfer of billions, billions, not thousands, not millions, but billions of dollars worth of bombs and fighter jets to Israel. Two sources familiar with the effort said on Friday, even as Washington publicly expresses concerns about an anticipated Israeli military offensive raid in Rafah. Now, the new arms packages include more than 1,800 munitions of 2,000-pound bombs, 500 additional bombs of 500-pound bombs. That's according to the sources who spoke, who confirmed a report in the Washington Post late this afternoon. Now, Washington gives about $4 billion in annual military assistance to Israel, its longtime ally. The package comes as Israel faces strong international criticism over its continued bombing campaign and ground offensive in Gaza, and as some members of President Joe Biden's party call for him to cut back U.S. military aid. The U.S. has been rushing air defenses and munitions to Israel, but some Democrats and Arab American groups have criticized Biden administration for steadily supporting Israel, which they say provides it with a sense of impunity. Now, Biden today, Friday afternoon, acknowledged, quote unquote, the pain being felt by many Arab Americans over the war in Gaza and over U.S. support for Israel and its military offensive. Here's my point. I don't have a problem with U.S. doing those kinds of things. I don't have a problem with U.S. supporting what we're doing there. But at the end of the day, this is not a U.S. war. It's not our war. It's not a war to fight. And the liberal left out there protesting across the country, trying to say, especially up in Michigan, where there's a lot of Palestinians, trying to voice their opinion, saying the government has to step in and stop this. The U.S. government has to stop the war. It's not our war. We didn't start it. We can't stop it. What they're asking is that we don't help either side. And that's just unrealistic in today's environment. But my problem with this story isn't that they're doing it. My problem is that last night the president and two former presidents were in New York and in Manhattan and raised $26 million at a fundraiser, while hundreds, if not thousands, of pro-Palestinian protesters were all over the streets in New York trying to put pressure on Biden and the Biden administration to stop supporting the Israelis. And Biden's been trying to stay low on this, and he has. Now, you going to tell me that Joe Biden didn't know this is going down? Listen, the one role of the President of the United States is commander-in-chief. We don't do anything with our military without the commander-in-chief signing off on it. That's his job. He had one job, protect our country. He hasn't protected it on the southern border. He's certainly not protecting it in many other areas. The president has known all along he's going to do this, and they dropped the news on Friday afternoon of Good Friday. It's a holiday weekend, a time when a lot of folks are going on spring break, coming back from spring break. And when those of us who are not on spring break, our attention is on March Madness. They're trying to bury the story. That's what that's about. It's a Friday afternoon news dump. You have to pay attention to those kinds of things because it's real, it happens, and you got to keep an eye on those things. That was today's news dump. My name's Jeff. It's Westside Jeff in for Chris Krok. Chris is back on Monday. We just talked a moment ago with Wendy Reisinger. Wendy works for, or had retired from the Dallas prosecutor's office. So she prosecuted crime. She retired from that position. She didn't want to totally go off in the sunset and not work. She wanted to do something on a limited part-time basis. So she went to work with a local law firm. And when she did, she got calls from the business community in and around Harry Hines area talking about there's a real problem with prostitutes down there. She went down and inspected it. She took all kinds of pictures. She spent many hours down there at all hours of the day. I talked to her once where she said she was down there between 2 and 4 in the morning, as well as 2 and 4 in the afternoon to see what the activity was. She said it wasn't a whole lot different. She said there were drugs all over the place. They're having sex in the cars. And you're going to find a lot of other stuff. Now, I've seen social media posts many a times across this community. I've got some in front of me. I had to cut some of these things out just so I get it right. A guy named Henry said, "It's the same old story, Jeff. Jane was supplying and John was buying." Patrick said, "Who the hell cares? Let people do their own thing," literally not hurting anyone. Those guys are wrong. They're absolutely wrong. I understand their concept of it's simple prostitution, a woman willingly selling her body to a man who's willingly paying for it. That's not what's going on. That's not what's going on. This is about organized crime. You go down there and start cracking down on that, and you're going to find a couple things. You're going to find gangs are running it. It's a gang business. It's a business of gangs. You're going to find a lot of drugs, illegal drugs down there, drug trafficking. That's how they fund it, with cash between that and prostitution. You're going to find a crap ton of illegal guns, hence why the city of Dallas cracked down on and arrested 30 people Wednesday over this. They seized 5 guns and more than $3,400 in cash. You're going to find human trafficking, and it's all driven by organized crime. Here's what I got to say about that. If you're going to tell me that prostitution's the oldest job in the world and mind your own business, not a big deal, woman selling her body, a guy paying for it, that's it, then you're telling me it's okay, you're in favor of organized crime. I don't think you are. I don't think you understand the magnitude of it. It's not as simple as woman selling her body to a guy. It's bigger than that. It's driven by organized crime. And the city's got to crack down on it. The feds need to be involved with it. The business community has to be a part of it. I commend Wendy for doing it and appreciate what she's doing. I'll continue to give her a voice for that. My name's Jeff. It's Westside Jeff. Earlier this week, there was a big story, and I haven't talked about it because I'm a person that reads it, processes it, and have an opinion. And the epiphany hit me this afternoon. NBC's hiring of Ronna McDaniel and the whole tantrum with regard to what NBC did and how it all went down. You've heard some of this story if you pay attention to the news. My question to you is this. Is it possible that was a PR stunt designed to get NBC free media? I'll tell you my answer on that in 4 minutes. I think it was. I'm a conspiracy theorist. I'll explain it 4 minutes from now. My name's Jeff. It's Westside Jeff in for Chris Krok on News Talk 820 WBAP and now on FM at 93.3. So a week ago today, NBC, again a Friday afternoon kind of news dump, NBC Network, named NBC News, announced the hiring of former Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel, and that she was going to join the NBC family of news networks so that she could be a guest and offering a dissenting opinion on NBC News, on MSNBC, on all the NBC platform of networks. Ronna McDaniel. Remember, she was the chairman of the RNC. She was put in place by Donald Trump when he was becoming the president. Now, the mainstream media seems determined to give ordinary Americans even more reasons to ignore it. You see, this week's collective tantrum at NBC News over the hiring of former RNC Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel gave them one more. Now, again, the network announced the hiring of Ronna McDaniel as a political analyst last Friday. They announced the fact that she would be, quote, give an insider's perspective on national politics and the future of the Republican Party. NBC announced and said, we hold no real brief for Ronna McDaniel as a spokeswoman for conservatives or Republicans. We don't really have a problem with that. But NBC brass were just trying to provide an alternative viewpoint from Donald Trump to the one that viewers get from NBC and MSNBC. So they wanted an alternative viewpoint is what they wanted to offer. Now, once that happened, she went on some shows on Sunday. Chuck Todd was one of those that absolutely blasted her. So Sunday, this last Sunday, you got to cue the moral outrage. You see, Sunday, Chuck Todd, former host of Meet the Press, he delivered an on-air tirade against his employers for engaging Ronna McDaniel. He and his colleagues were upset because, quote unquote, many of our professional dealings with the RNC over the last 6 years have been met with gaslighting, is what Chuck Todd said. Morning Joe, host of Joe Scarborough, Mika Morning Joe show, added their disapproval on the air Monday. Mika insisted their objection wasn't to conservative Republicans, but to hiring of an anti-democracy election denier. That's what she said, anti-democracy election denier. MSNBC's Rachel Maddow, she happens to be the star of the network, devoted a half hour to the subject. She said, it's not about whether McDaniel's a Republican or Democrat. It's about our system of government and undermining elections and going after democracy. So Chuck Todd, Morning Joe, and Rachel Maddow all talked about making it about the system of government and undermining elections and going after democracy. Now, McDaniel's problem seems to be that she participated in a phone call back in November after the election, in which November of 2020, which Trump urged two Republican canvassers in Wayne County, Michigan, not to certify the election results. She also said that President Biden didn't win the election, quote unquote, fair. NBC's talent used democracy as their reasoning that was a problem. I contend that's BS. It wasn't really that. They were voicing out against the Republican Party's platform of conservatism, but they used it under the guise of what they called democracy. And I'll prove it. If these on-air people, if these NBC employees really felt so strongly that challenging election results is unforgivable, then they wouldn't have given the respectful airwaves and the respectful time, at times fawning. They were just fawning over interviews to Stacey Abrams down in Georgia, long after she refused to concede the 2018 Georgia gubernatorial race, which she lost by almost 55,000 votes. I don't recall hearing any of those defenders of democracy or reading anything from those defenders of democracy decrying, criticizing Democrats, including Hillary Clinton, for denying Donald Trump was a legitimate winner in 2016. Or the 31 Democratic House members who on January 6 back in 2005 attempted to stop certification of Ohio's electors so as to deny George W. Bush's reelection. No, They didn't do anything then to become defenders of democracy. All they did is say the election was stolen. Now, several of those 31 election deniers in the Democratic Party, to use Mika's term, she talked about Sheila Jackson was one of them. Sheila Jackson Lee, a Democrat here in Texas. Barbara Lee, a Democrat in California. Ed Markey, a Democrat in Massachusetts. They have all appeared many times, many times on NBC and MSNBC and been treated as royalty. It's also hard to take Chuck Todd seriously. His claims that the RNC under McDaniel was uniquely guilty of gaslighting. That seems to be the new term, sophisticated term that the Democrats use. Gaslighting, right? If they really cared about gaslighting, they would be more concerned about the mainstream press gaslighting many of the stories that make you and I, as consumers of media, question what they're doing. The more salient point here is that NBC has signed up Democratic gaslighters with regularity. Most recently, Jen Psaki. Psaki went straight from the Biden White House as a press secretary to her own show on MSNBC. Psaki's many White House hits include calling the southern border closed. She did that for the longest time. She denied Americans were stranded in Afghanistan. Can't tell you how many times I heard her talk about that. And threatening tech platforms if they didn't censor certain COVID views. Is that gaslighting? Is that defending of democracy? Now, on Tuesday, the NBC brass bowed to their employees and cut ties with Ronna McDaniel. The network's viewers will be fine without her analysis, but the episode explains why Americans, why you and I, why Texans just don't trust the news media. You see, network bosses were plainly trying to avoid the mistakes of 2016 by recruiting some non-crazy voices on Trump-aligned right. 8 years ago, mainstream outlets covered Trump with little but withering scorn. They alienated millions of Americans who felt deep reservations about Hillary Clinton. And after the election, couldn't explain how Trump won that election. The tempest over McDaniel suggests that press is preparing to make the same mistake again. And this is bad for our country, but it's even worse for the press, which still just doesn't understand why it's so mistreated. My question to you, we'll talk about it on the other side of the news. Lori Waffen-Schmidt just dropped a note on my desk that said she's got an update on what's going on with Trump and the Trump gag order, as well as a Lieberman funeral. She's got that coming up in 4 minutes. On the other side of that, I'll tell you why I think that NBC story didn't just happen. We'll talk about that in about 6 minutes. My name is Jeff. It's Westside Jeff. In for Chris Krok on News Talk 820 WBAP and now on FM at 93.3. Name is Westside Jeff. Born and raised up in the state of Ohio. Born in Columbus. Grew up on the west side of Columbus, which was a little gritty, salty, blue-collar-ish neighborhood. My dad was a plumber. I did some stupid things as a kid. Was dropped on my head a bunch of times. There are people that I grew up with that said, no, it's just Jeff. He's West Side. He's very West Side. That's stuck. West Side Jeff. You know me. Name's Jeff. Just West Side Jeff. 800-288-9227 is a phone number. I'm available across social media at Westside Jeff on Facebook, on Instagram, on X. Chris is back on Monday. I was talking a moment ago about the fact that NBC got in a little tiff here over this last week because a week ago they announced Ronna McDaniel was joining the NBC family of network, the news side. And that set off a firestorm. It started with Chuck Todd on Sunday news shows. It continued on Monday with Joe Scarborough and Mika. And then it continued the rest of the week as many of the hosts on MSNBC and the NBC network of shows just railed against their employer. Rachel Maddow was one of them. She devoted a half hour to the show. Now, I've been in the broadcasting business all my life. And I worked for the largest radio broadcaster in the country for 30-some years. before losing my job. I got riffed, the old reduction in workforce. I was told, you're the old white guy, in so many words. It was the official talking points were, this is a reduction in workforce. You're not being terminated for performance reasons. You're eligible for rehire. In essence, you're older. You're not a protected class other than age. Because you're older, you make quite a bit of money. We're going to eliminate you from the books, and we'll figure out how to deal with it. 36 years and three months to the day on the job. Loved the job. Want to work another 15 years, 20 years, because I loved this business. Companies typically aren't quick to fire people. But one of the things I've learned about broadcasters and broadcasting, you get on radio, you get on TV, and you trash your employer, and you go public and you make a big stink about your employer and the moves that they make, and you take it public and you say things about your boss and your boss's boss's boss and the moves that they make, they fire you. I've seen it done in the middle of a talk show, a program director walking in the studio, cutting the mic, somebody grabbing the host, walk him out the door, program director sitting in and explaining what just happened. I've heard of television newsrooms doing that. That stuff's real. When you go on news media, when you go on a broadcasting station, whether it be radio or television, and you rail against your employer, they fire you. As somebody once said to me years ago, said the squeaky wheel in broadcasting, the squeaky wheel doesn't get the grease. The squeaky wheel gets replaced. I'm just giving you common sense, right? Let me tell you, in your job, in your position, in the career path that you're in, you go into your office, you go into your company, and you go out publicly and you talk about how bad of decisions management made, bonehead decisions. Do they promote you? Hell no. They fire you. They do it quick. They wipe it. They wipe your email. They turn everything off. They escort you to the door. That's common. With that being said, the conspiracy side of me says the Ronna McDaniel story might have actually been planned. Because otherwise, again, I'm a consumer of news. I've read many of the NBC reports on this, CBS, ABC, CNN, MSNBC, Fox. I've read story after story about how this thing went down, who said what, when, and where in the timelines. It doesn't make sense to me. I do not believe in my heart of hearts that NBC willy-dilly just made a decision to bring in Ronna McDaniel last Friday and prounce her out there on the Sunday television talk shows and ask their hosts to have her on this last week. And that everybody would play along with it and say, yeah, we welcome her. Come on in. I do not believe that's how that went down. I think that was a publicity stunt. I just do. It just makes sense to me. Because there's no way Chuck Todd comes out and goes as vocal as he does and say it's a bonehead decision. There's no way that Joe Scarborough and Mika go on the air and say the things that they say about the fact that Ronna McDaniel is an anti-democracy election denier. And it's a bad decision for MSNBC to bring her on board and to have them have to use her as part of their show. I do not believe that Rachel Maddow would have devoted a half hour to the subject and say things like, it's not about whether McDaniel's a Republican or Democrat. It's about our system of government and undermining elections and going after democracy. I do not believe that. Do I believe one host might have been very vocal and gone rogue? Yes. But when you have the three biggest names on the network all saying the same thing, just reeks of a publicity stunt. Three biggest names: Chuck Todd, Joe and Mika, Rachel Maddow. Those are the stars of the network. And for them to come out and rail against NBC for hiring Ronna McDaniel and putting her on the air, I can't turn to any other decision other than the fact of saying that was a setup. That was designed. That was about, it just reeks and it looks and it sounds and it smells like NBC did that to get attention. And it worked because they had every news network in this country talking about it. A lot of the other competitive broadcasters showing the video of it, of their NBC folks on their networks. CNN did, CBS did, ABC did. That was a fabulous PR stunt, if you ask me. You got an opinion? I'd love to hear it. Name is Jeff. It's Westside Jeff sitting in for Chris Krok. Chris is back Monday. You can reach me at 800-288-9227. 800-288-9227. That spells WBAP. I'm also across social media, Facebook, X, and Instagram, Westside Jeff. I think the Ronna McDaniel story, the more I've read, the more I've thought about it, the more I've watched it develop, that was a developed story. They created it to drive attention. If they had fired Chuck Todd, if they'd moved on from Joe and Mika, if they had denounced Rachel Maddow, I would not be sitting here saying that. But when the three big names on that network rail on their employer, just absolutely crucify them, and nothing happens, sorry, but I'm just telling you, that was a publicity stunt. And the rest of the news media, reporting national news media, fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. It's Good Friday. Sunday is Easter. 80% of parents admit to occasionally doing this to their kids on Easter. Give me 5 minutes. Give me 4.5 minutes. I'll tell you what it is. I'm Westside Jeff in for Chris Krok on News Talk 820 WBAP and now on FM at 93.3. Was just talking a moment ago to Lori Waffenschmidt in the newsroom. I'm Jeff, Westside Jeff, sitting in for Chris Krok. Chris is back on Monday. Working with my producer, Garrett. Garrett, thanks for being a part of the show. He's my teammate here, and when you pick up the phone and call, you'll talk to Garrett. We've got Lori in the newsroom with news along the way, so anything that breaks out will break in, and she's got top and bottom of the hour news. I was asking her a little bit during the break real quick about what's coming up, and she said she got a story about the update on the Baltimore Bridge cleanup, but also American Airlines. Talking about she mentioned something about a new policy with flying for pets. She's got that story coming up in about 11 minutes. Name is Jeff. It's Westside Jeff in for Chris Krok. It's funny because Sunday is Easter, and I had to take a look at Easter. I'm curious. I have a favorite little chocolate store I go into, and when I walked in earlier today, there was a line out the door, and I'm like, whoa, made me ask, how big is it? Well, the average person will spend about $177 celebrating Easter. I mentioned a moment ago, 80% of adults admit to doing this for Easter. I'll come back and tell you that in about 45 seconds. 91 million chocolate bunnies are sold in the U.S. every Easter season. 3 in 4 parents plan on having, quote-unquote, a talk with their children about eating candy in moderation. Because candy certainly is what ends up in Easter baskets, and it's the same conversation you have with your kids during Halloween. Can't eat it all at once. Hallmark this year had 195 different Easter Hallmark cards. The 80%, well, 80% of parents admit to occasionally stealing from their kids' candy stash. Are you part of that 80%? Do you dip into your kids' candy? My kids are grown and gone, but yes, I'm part of that 80%. I'm only taking the Reese cups, I'm taking their malted milk balls, and maybe every now and then a jelly bean. The rest of the stuff they can have. Westside Jeff's the name if you want to weigh in on the show. 800-288-9227, 800-288 WBAP. You can also hit me up across social media on Facebook, on X, and on Instagram at Westside Jeff. So it's March Madness. And it's going on right here in Dallas with the Sweet 16. I contend that the NCAA men's college basketball has a star issue. It's a problem, and it's hurting them. I was talking to Garrett, my producer, during the break a moment, and he said, "Hey, Jeff, who do you have going all the way?" And I said, "You know what, Garrett, in all the years I've done a NCAA bracket, I usually have 4 or 5 brackets. This is the first year I didn't do a bracket." He said, "Why not?" I said, "Well, let me ask you, Garrett. Did you do one?" He said, "No." He said, all my buddies from school get together. He's in his 20s, and they usually fill out their brackets. I said, "Why didn't you fill out a bracket?" And he mumbled and rambled on for a minute. No offense on that, Garrett. And we were talking about it, and I kept pushing him, interrogating him, and pushing him for the answer. And finally, he said what I think really prevails of what's going on with college basketball across this country. I'll put words in his mouth, but he said, "You know what, Jeff, it used to be I knew the teams, I knew the players. I don't know any of the players now. The only player I know in college basketball is," can you guess who he said? I'll tell you who that is in about 3 minutes. You see, men's college basketball has a star issue. It's become an afterthought for a generation of American basketball prospects. I've not felt more disengaged from the collective collegiate basketball March Madness consciousness than I am right now. The name Zach Edey, he's the big man for Purdue. He's the only one I can think of from a name perspective across college basketball and the men's basketball. And by all effects, draft experts say this is one of the weakest college basketball classes going to the NBA. That's bad for the Dallas Stars and the NBA. That's bad for men's college basketball because I'm usually locked in by now. I'm watching the games. I'm paying attention. I'm going through my brackets. I'm talking to other people about them, but I'm not this year. And do you know why? It's because men's college basketball has a star issue. I contend if you're a college basketball fan, you probably can't name 5 players. And if you're an avid fan, you can't name an entire team or even close. And if you're just a light fan, you can't name one. You see, men's college basketball has been ruined by the transfer portal. And it's been ruined by what's gone on in college athletics today. There's 5 guys on a court. College football, you've got 11 on offense, 11 on defense. You have some special teams, so you have typically 25 to 28 players that you kind of get to know. College basketball, there's 5. So there's less people to get to know. And when those less people to get to know are leaving after 1 year, they're one and done because they transfer or they go into the G League or somewhere else, it doesn't give us a chance to get to know them. You see, as sports fans, we root for people we love and we root against people we don't like. We look for people we hate. People in Dallas, football fans, hate the Eagles. Most people in football, I remember watching when Peyton Manning was inducted into the Hall of Fame, National Football Hall of Fame. Tom Brady took time off from training camp down in Tampa. He flew up to Canton, Ohio to appear because Manning asked him to. He asked Tom to stand up, and he talked about Tom Brady. All through that, I remember hearing the entire stadium booing. You see, people in football loved Tom Brady, and others hated Tom Brady. We need to root for somebody. We need to root against somebody. We love stars. Stars we love, stars we hate. We don't have stars in college basketball, and it's because of the state of college basketball. The one and done society. You know who the most notable, the biggest name in college basketball is today? I asked you that 3 minutes ago. I'll tell you who it is. The biggest name in college basketball today, men's or women's, Caitlin Clark. My producer Garrett even said that during the break we were talking. I said, you can't name any players, can you? He said, not on the men's side, but I can tell you the biggest name I can think of is Caitlin. And I said, there you go. See, the problem with college basketball right now is recognition of star factor. Football's got it figured out. There are stars. We know the name Dak. We know the name Zeke. We know the name Russ. We know a lot of names in college football, stars, star factor. It's because they've stayed there long enough. We love to hate them. We love to love them. We root for them. We root against them. That's what we need as sports fans, and we do not have that in college basketball. That's the problem with college basketball today. They got to fix it. It's broken. The system's broken. They need to fix it. If you got an opinion, I'd love to hear it. My name's Jeff. It's Westside Jeff in for Chris Krok. Chris is back on Monday. I'm on News Talk 820 WBAP and now on the FM at 93.3. Coming up after the top of the hour news. By the way, Lori's got some stories coming up in the news. She said, talking about the bridge cleanup. Also, American Airlines has a new pet policy. But on the other side of that, I want to talk a little bit about customer service. Restaurants. I had a really bad experience in a restaurant on vacation when I went up to Knoxville to visit my daughter. I was surprised at the outcome. Is customer service dead or alive in restaurants? I want to hear your stories. I'll tell you mine. We'll get your calls right after that. Westside Jeff in for Chris Krok on News Talk 820 WBAP and now on the FM at 93.3.